Didn't do all that much. Maybe we should call it half-acid rain. But anyway, the fact of the matter is that, I mean, our federal government said that left unchecked, it would create a, quote, ecological silent spring, end quote. Right. And then there was, you forgot the ozone hole, too. You keep forgetting that there's always an apocalypse. And this book talks about why is there always an apocalypse. And it's because, unfortunately, the way we fund our science, people who scream the loudest get the federal funding in the competitive process.
Let me talk about a little bit of economics as well. The boogeyman here seems to be carbon. That we want to go after carbon. We want to go after carbon-based businesses and industries, which might as well just say we want to go after industry, because any sizable industry produces carbon. I mean, that's right. The way it is. We can change all of our electricity over to propeller power, but that's only going to be a small fraction. We're going to have to burn something at some point. Am I wrong in saying that carbon is not the largest factor in global temperatures? It seems to me that there's other things such as water and solar flares and all other things, but we're focusing on man-made carbon.
Well, we look at carbon dioxide because that's the greenhouse gas, meaning a gas that absorbs infrared radiation coming from the surface of the Earth and can re-radiate it back down and warm the lower atmosphere. We focus on that one because people are burning fossil fuels and burns to carbon dioxide and water. And it's very clear that the concentration has been increasing in the atmosphere, and it's proportional to the amount that we're burning. It's been projected for a long time that that would raise the surface temperature. Okay, now stop. Does that mean that it raises the surface temperature in a way that is apocalyptic and dangerous and scary? And people jump from one thing to the other. They say, well, if you say CO2 is causing warming, then therefore we must do something about it. And I'm not so sure that second thing follows at all for several historical reasons. One, it's very, very hard to do something about it. Do you remember the Kyoto Protocol on global warming?
I remember it well.
Can you say what it was?
It was basically to stop us from producing all sorts of things, but every other country got off scot-free.
Well, what it had is a 7% reduction in U.S. carbon dioxide emissions below 1990 levels by the year 2008 or 2008 to 2012. We've gone up about 15% since 1990. A lot of other countries had emissions reductions that were put on them by the protocol. Nobody really met the protocol. That's the amazing thing. And this was a very minor reduction. You know how much warming the Kyoto Protocol would prevent if you believe the mean value of the climate models that were run at the time? It would prevent 0.07 of a degree Celsius warming per half century. I didn't say 0.7. I didn't say 7 degrees. I said 0.07 of a degree per half century. An amount so small that you couldn't measure it. But obviously the cost was so great that countries wouldn't do it.
Wouldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it.
Right.
How are you so certain of these numbers? And I know that these models, you know, it's kind of like bowling, in that you move the ball a little bit at the beginning, right, and by the end of the lane, you're off completely. You know, so tell me about the models that are used and what consensus comes out to be what a good model is and what a bad model is.
Well, the computer models that we're talking about that have the 0.07 of a degree figure, they assume that it would warm about 2.5 degrees C if we doubled atmospheric carbon dioxide and just kind of let it stay there. And you could take those models and reduce the atmospheric carbon concentration in them a small amount that Kyoto would do, and then rerun them and see how much warming they produce. And they produce only 0.07 of a degree less warming per half century. So that's what those computer models say. Now, the models themselves are subject of, I think, a very, very healthy debate. I examined recently for some congressional testimony the statistical behavior of what's called the mid-range set of the United Nations models, and found that the observed warming trends were falling at or below the 95% confidence limits of these models. Now, usually a scientist would say if the data don't fit at the 95% level, you throw out the hypothesis, which in this case means you throw out the models. But we go forward. I think that fact that there is such a mismatch developing between the mean models and the temperature trends is going to become important in any fight over carbon dioxide regulation.
talk to me a little bit about these studies. Talk to me about how they're funded. You put up forward an interesting assertion that if you make a lot of noise, you get a lot of funding.
Of course you do. Welcome to Washington.
Explain this, because I've always thought that in the pursuit of scientific truth, you might put out a hypothesis, you gather your evidence. If your evidence doesn't support the hypothesis, it means that either your evidence is wrong or your hypothesis is wrong, and that you have this critical process where fellow scientists, fellow researchers are constantly criticizing what you write, you criticize what they write, and over time you start coming up with the truth. Am I off on this?
That's ever so slightly naive.
All right.
Let's start at the top. Suppose we're having a hearing in the U.S. Senate, and a junior senator by the name of Mr. Gore goes to the administrator for NASA and says, people have told me global warming is the most important problem confronting mankind. Could your agency use another couple $2 billion a year to study it? What do you think the administrator of NASA is going to say? No, it's not important. Of course he's going to say it's important. And then the various departments are going to have to write proposals as to how to spend this $2 billion or whatever it is. Do you think they're going to write proposals saying we don't think this is an important issue? They would not win in the competition, and nor will a scientist win by writing a research proposal that says that I think that this is all a bunch of overblown hokum. There's going to be very severe criticism.
Are you saying that just because these reports don't go out the way that your reports have come out? Are you saying that, is this just sour grapes, that you wish that those reports agreed with you? Don't these scientists have a responsibility as scientists to report the truth? Don't they know it?
Actually, Bob Balling and I in the book Climate of Extremes tested that as a hypothesis. We tested it to see whether, in fact, the science itself carried a bias. In the following sense, let's not think about global warming. Let's talk about the weather forecast for next Wednesday. I don't know what the forecast is, but let's say it says a high of 55 degrees. Computer models will be run twice a day with new data that come in from weather balloons around the world. And they're going to give you another forecast. The chance that the new forecast is warmer than 55 degrees, it's exactly the same as the new chance that the new forecast will be colder than 55 degrees. In other words, you have an unbiased model. And every new piece of information can make it seem worse than we thought or not as bad as we thought. And so I went into the scientific literature and looked at major journals and took over a year's worth of articles and sorted them into 3 piles. It's worse than we thought, it's not as bad as we thought, or I can't tell from reading this article whether it's bad or worse or not. And the ratio of it's worse than we thought to it's not as bad as we thought runs about 9 to 1. Now, with the sample size of over 100 articles, that's like throwing a coin 100 times and getting only 11 heads or tails. The chance of that happening is less than 1 in 10 by a million zeros.
Couldn't you just say that those original estimates were wrong and way too conservative? Now that we have better information, better sensory equipment, better minds working at it, we get a better look. And
why would we a priori make the assumption that the first estimates on a phenomenon would be underestimates? In fact, I think in science, often the first estimates are overestimates that get trimmed back.